Due Process, recipient of 6 Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards.
If the people that they have under their commands engage in racial profiling, it will not be tolerated in any form or fashion.
Now, 4 months later, has the state police superintendent lived up to his own promise? How has he handled a resistant rank and file? Has he made real progress in reversing racial profiling? Joe Santiago taking on the tough questions on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
They were the elite of New Jersey's law enforcers. Then racial profiling tarnished the image. I'm Raymond Brown, and it's been 5 years now since the profiling scandal went public. The state police have yet to recover, but as Sandy King is here to tell us, whether the troopers like it or not, they do have a new leader.
Raymond, he has been on the job now for about 4 months. And Joe Santiago, who shook things up at the Newark PD, has made sure state troopers know he's there, beginning with his pledge to put an end to racial profiling. It's a pledge he made when the governor first named him and at his swearing in 3 difficult months later.
I, Joseph J. Santiago, do solemnly swear.
The road to his swearing in as the 13th superintendent of New Jersey's state police had been long.
From the time I was 17 and even earlier, all I wanted to be was a police officer.
And hard.
I'm not just voting no, I'm voting hell no.
And sometimes embarrassing.
This individual's background and temperament raises many serious issues. I believe this nomination is in the front to every officer in our state police and our entire law enforcement community.
But in the end, the governor and the mayor,
he will make an excellent superintendent of the state police,
got their way. And after 3 months of working to win confirmation, the real work was about to begin.
We will do everything we can to reestablish the trust and support of the citizens that we're here to serve.
It is a trust and support that's been seriously compromised by nearly 5 years of allegations and finally official admission of racial profiling as practice and even policy of New Jersey State Police.
So again, you guys are the first ones out there. We're counting on you.
And though Santiago insists he has no desire to be the profiling superintendent, he knows that real reform on New Jersey's highways is a major part of his mandate.
Racial profiling is not only immoral, it is illegal. And Superintendent Santiago will ensure that heightened level of accountability across all lines. Tough, strong, fair management, which will be essential.
It is that tough, strong management style, demonstrated during 6 years as Newark's top cop, that won Santiago the McGreevy appointment.
He steadily rose through the ranks, took charge of the Newark Police Department. The crime rate in the city dropped to an historic low.
And the support of national law enforcement leaders.
He's an honorable and decent human being that's poured his life into the public service.
I don't think some mistakes that may have been made in the past should be held against Joe Santiago. He has proven himself over the last 6 years to be one of the top chiefs in America.
But those past mistakes, among them a conviction for simple assault, a failure to pay taxes, a bankruptcy declaration, did not go unnoticed by detractors. From some disgruntled former Newark employees,
what you have are people that are afraid of Mr. Santiago. Mr. Santiago bullies people. If you speak against Mr. Santiago, he's a vengeful person.
Two prospective subordinates from the state police.
The approval of this nominee will continue to deplete the morale of the state police. This is not just idle chatter, but this is the sober fact of how we feel.
And in his 4 months on the job, Santiago's had to walk a fine line. The need on one side to win the respect and cooperation of the troopers who opposed his appointment.
I know this guy. You should have your brother here.
And on the other, to satisfy ongoing demands that those troopers be subject to discipline and reform in order to finally and completely purge racial profiling.
This is an institutional problem that's deeply rooted. It goes from the officer at the lowest ranks to the officers at the highest ranks of the organization. So you might have a very good leader at the top. You might have someone who's sincere and really wants to stop the problem. But this problem is endemic to the police culture.
So for people who say there's not much problem left with racial profiling, I would disagree vehemently, because until that culture is changed, racial profiling is not going to end, which means that 2 years from now, if there's another superintendent, or 5 years down the road, if the culture has not changed, we could be right back talking about this situation 5 years from now.
As recently as last September, his predecessor conceded that despite his efforts, racial profiling remained a fact of life among troopers.
Do we still have problems? Yes, we still have problems. We're an organization of 3,000 personnel. You're always going to have people out there doing things that you don't want them doing. What you have to do is create an environment in which people understand that it is not in their best interest to not go along with the policies that we've implemented.
Have you gotten that message across?
I think so.
I think he came in and had a political leadership which was not committed to change, but really wanted somebody who would just go along.
A lot of things.
Santiago, you think, will be a more forceful adversary?
I think he's forceful. I don't think he will shake it off. I think he will take no prisoners.
But has the word gone out? Has it made a real long-lasting difference? And how to explain the latest stats released just last week that show blacks on the turnpike still being stopped in disproportionate numbers? The man to ask, the state police superintendent, Joe Santiago. Welcome to Due Process.
Hi, how are you, Sandy?
Let me add my welcome to Sandy's, but before we start asking you some questions, let me just make sure the viewers know that my dad and law partner testified on your behalf at the state Senate. Everybody ought to know that. In fact, I think it's one of the few times he's ever testified for a law enforcement officer. And in fact, that state Senate process still seems to me might be lingering. We saw Senator Allen vote hell no. Senator Cardinal compared you to a fascist dictator. And the vote was 22-17, with at least press reports suggesting that some Democrats saying they voted for you only out of respect for the governor. Does it matter that your support in the Senate is that close in terms of your ongoing responsibilities? Are there times when it might matter to you on matters of policy or legislation that the Senate is not 100% behind you?
I'd like to say that no, it won't matter. You know, obviously you take in consideration, you understand that there was a substantial amount of people that were opposed to it. But I think fundamentally when you look at the right thing to do, my job is to come in there and take the state police to another level. To deal with the state police in a way that we take this specter of racial profiling and we put it behind us, and we get on to do a lot of the important work that the state police are doing now and need to do, particularly in light of 911.
Superintendent, what about those numbers of last week that showed that, in fact, between November 1st and April 30th, a period for which we cannot, for the most part, hold you accountable, but during that period, in fact, the numbers of blacks stopped on the turnpike remained disproportionately high, particularly down south at the Moorestown Barracks. Does that concern you? Does that make you think that perhaps the problem is far from over and runs as deep as we heard Larry Hamm and Reggie Jackson claim?
Obviously, as I told them black ministers last week, those numbers are problematic. I think it merits an examination. It's something we intend to do. One of the things that we're doing in response to those numbers is that we're going to start looking at that data every 2 weeks. There's an explanation. We want to know what it is. Whether the explanation is potentially a reasonable one, whether it's predicated upon the behaviors of the troopers, the behaviors of the drivers involved, or whatever it may be, we're going to start looking at the data, because it's not going to change, and it's not going to be able to be explained away until we really focus on it and come up with some reasonable explanations. I told them last week that I didn't have an answer, but I will find an answer between now and 6 months from now as to how we can change those numbers.
Racial profiling, then, to your mind, still a problem on the Turnpike?
It's still we're still talking about it, obviously. And the numbers, particularly at the southern end, drive a question. And I think it's our obligation to answer it. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to examine the data. We're going to continue with the training and the improvements we've had made. The monitor's report points out that the troopers are acting professionally, treating everyone courteously. So it's not the issue of looking at tapes and how troopers are interacting with people. The one question we have now are the numbers, and we're going to take every effort to make sure that we address it.
There's been obviously a change in public policy, 2 changes in leadership, and continued public scrutiny and consent decree and monitoring. Is it your view that there is something more that you may have to do in order to make the cultural change that seems to be at the bottom of this?
Obviously, there's a lot more to do. I mean, a lot's been done. You have to give some credit to the people who were here before and started the process. First of all, you're talking about institutionalizing a lot of the reforms. I mean, no agency should be forced to do the right thing through a consent order. What our obligation is to create those systems that allow us to monitor ourselves and monitor our own behavior and make sure that if we do have a problem with an individual trooper or people in there, that we identify it ourselves, we take remedial action, and we make a change. The other part of it is there's a lot to do in terms of training and for example, redefining the mission of the state police. Much has changed since 1921 when they were formed, and I think the agency needs to be reoriented toward its new mission. And I think that helps get over problems such as profiling, when the troopers are well aware of what's expected of them.
Well, we got to ask, what's the new mission?
Well, the new mission is being developed. We formed, when I took over, I created a series of development teams made up of troopers themselves, people from outside the agency. So the process is pretty transparent to address a series of issues that are confronting state police as far as we're concerned. One was the mission. The other one was to develop accountability systems to make sure that supervisors and managers were held accountable. The other was to develop a system that measured things that we did by results, not by activity, which is one of the reasons I think we got in this trouble to begin with. One is a process of outreach. The state police need to engage in outreach, not only within law enforcement community, but the other communities that make up New Jersey. So we've started those processes.
You said you didn't want to be known as the profiling superintendent, but in fact, isn't it your success or failure on profiling that's going to mark your success or failure in this job? Isn't that how you are going to be judged, maybe even how you'll judge yourself?
Well, I think not. I mean, ultimately perhaps, but I think in order to attack the environment of the creative profiling, I think there's a lot of other ills organizationally that must be addressed. For example, you're talking about accountability systems must be instituted. I have to do those things. I have to engage in a training process that's realistic and talks about changing not only behavior but attitudes of state troopers. I have to talk about creating a system where the state troopers feel that they're being treated fairly by their own organization.
Okay, and you have to do all of this with a rank and file that opposed you bitterly during your confirmation and frankly didn't want you around. How tough is that?
Well, you think it's tough to begin with, but I've been going out talking to the troopers at the different stations. And I think ultimately what I've said to them and what I'm starting to get back from them is that leadership is leadership. I think for the most part, you're talking about the average state trooper, not the union representatives. They want leadership. I don't think they joined this organization to have the conversation turn on racial profiling consistently. State police have historically done some great things in law enforcement and are still doing some great things that no one's talking about. So we need to address this issue so we can start talking about the things that they do really well.
Let me come back to your earlier statement about a new mission. I know you have task force, but everything we know about your style of leadership is that you're not going to be totally beholden to task force, although you use them. The question is, what do you perceive as the new mission? There are issues like how much should the state police be involved in local law enforcement, a host of questions. What's the heart of the new mission that you see?
The heart of the new mission, I think, most importantly, is to identify it and communicate it to the state troopers. Where the problem came before, what I think, is that they were starting to measure themselves based upon summonses and arrests. And the reward system was predicated upon just mere numbers. What you have to do is create missions that has social value and communicate it to them. So at the end of the day, much like a city cop, when they go home, they know they've accomplished something of value to their community or the people that they work for. That's what we're doing. We're looking at ourselves in terms of post 9/11. What's our role in terms of fighting terrorism, counterterrorism?
What is
in
your
America?
role? We've heard from, on this program, we've heard from the Justice Department, we've heard from the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey. Frankly, nobody ever talks, when they talk about fighting terrorism in New Jersey, about the state police. What is your role?
I think we have a very significant role. The governor has given us a role, even though we have an Office of Counterterrorism. We have about 30 of our state police officers comprise the counterterrorism unit of the Office of Counterterrorism. We have the Office of Emergency Management, which is a significant part of Domestic Preparedness Task Force that we're part of. We're doing infrastructure assessments. We've been doing these things, and state police have always responded to all the emergencies in New Jersey. As a matter of fact, as the superintendent, I am the director of the Office of Emergency Management for the state. And again, these are some of the really important things that they're doing. That's why we need to address profiling. We need to address it in significant ways. We need to create a structure that makes sure that we monitor it and make sure it doesn't happen again. So we could talk about the things that are really important that the state police do.
On 911, let me put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's the 4th of July.
Yes.
All over the country, there's this discussion that everybody should be alert, but we don't know anything specific. In terms of New Jersey, what should New Jerseyans expect, and what will the state police do about it?
State police are doing, what we've done is there's no specific threats. I think that's the really, the hard part of all of this. There's not a lot of information coming from let's say, the federal government and others. What we're doing is we're getting a lot of unspecified information. We're poised. We had a meeting not only yesterday to talk about that we're ready. We have air assets in the aviation unit. We have marine people. We have approximately about 80 to 100 troopers that are ready to respond to any issue. I think the thing is you can't respond to a specific threat, but you're prepared to respond to any kind of threat or request for service, and we're prepared to do that.
Let me come back, Superintendent, to these charges of racism in the state police historically, not just against drivers on the turnpike or other roads, but against other troopers. We've just seen a settlement of a lawsuit with multi-million-dollar damages rewarded to troopers. Are you satisfied now that within the state police, trooper to trooper, superior officer to trooper, that in fact racism no longer plays a part? And what about recruitment? 5 years of talking about recruitment, and are the numbers now where you want them to be?
No, of course not. I think, you know, obviously I just got here and I'm looking at those things. I mentioned before about creating an organization where the members feel they're being treated fairly, and it goes toward that. We're in the process of changing the promotional system. As a matter of fact, we're poised to be able to make some promotions to have a significant amount of African Americans, even females, take some of the top spots of the organization. Not token spots, but real operational spots where they have some authority and control over the operations of the state police.
And doesn't that then create still more problems with the union and with those who oppose you from inside?
No, it won't, because the people that we're talking about are eminently qualified. I'm not going to reach out and promote someone, particularly to either a woman or an African American or a Latino, if they're not prepared, because then you'll feed into that. I think once we make those decisions and we can publicly announce who these people are, other people in the state police will realize they have leadership skills, and it doesn't make a difference what they look like or what their gender is.
But in a sense, we do come back to the cultural question. If you pay $4 million to 13 African Americans, which is what I think it is, on the one hand, you could say, well, just look case by case and see if discrimination continues, or you could say that reflects some kind of systematic process that I need to get at and root out. As you look at those two alternatives, which one would you embrace in terms of the past, and what would you do?
What we're doing is, I'm not taking anything for granted. Obviously, we're looking at how do we institutionalize all these things. One is by making opportunities available for everybody in the organization. Two is by being vigilant. You know, it's much like in policing when I was the head of the Newark Police Department. No department has corruption unless they look for it. You know, issues are always there. You know, you can hide your head in the sand, but we're not prepared to do that. I think one of the problems that created a consent order was the inability of the organization or the Attorney General's office at that time to admit that there was a problem, or to even to admit the obvious. What we're going to do is we're going to identify a problem, We're going to say what the problem is, and we're going to identify what action we're going to take in response to that problem.
Now, the one thing that question that begs is that the one consistent criticism of you has been that while some say you're strong leaders, others have said, quite frankly, you're a tyrant. And if you want to create an organization which fosters self-criticism and honest appraisal of problems, how do you do that when you're perceived as an awfully strong leader?
Well, I am a strong leader, and I guess I will continue to be a strong leader. And the only people that have really ever had a problem with me is any police officer that wants to be abusive or wants to be corrupt. What we did when we took over was the fact that we created a series of development teams. The solutions to the organization's problem, for the most part, reside within the organization. There are people within the organization that are dying for the opportunity to communicate what they can do, and they started doing that. We had about 80 to 100 troopers, road troopers from all over, work with us and develop it. I detached them to do these things, to work on revamping the promotional system, to work on revamping the accountability system, to work on community outreach programs. I mean, right now we're in Camden. We have 100 troopers in Camden doing things that the state police never did before. We go to community meetings and the public actually supports us. You got troopers in churches, troopers dealing with kids in significant ways, not in tokenism and not just for show. And we're working on reducing the crime rate in Camden. This last month in June, since we've been there, they had not one homicide when they had several the same period last year.
But in fact, you are a take no prisoners kind of guy. You are a tough leader. Your greatest supporters say that as a compliment, right? Here you are coming in from outside, a source of much of the resistance from the rank and file, and coming in with a pretty strong management approach. We've already seen you being put in an awkward position when, in fact, your badge was taken away and you were told that you couldn't wear the uniform and you couldn't be called colonel. Will there be that sort of adversarial thing going on between you and the union, you and your rank and file, and how do you get past that?
I've gotten past it already. I don't let that bother me. For example, the fact that I can't wear a uniform, I wore one proudly for 33 years. The fact that I can't have a colonel's badge or be called colonel, that doesn't make me any less a leader. I'm still in charge of the state police. And once that happened, I continued on with the reforms that we're instituting. I have people responding to me because they respond to leadership. They want to be led out of this. There's a lot of people in the state police that have indicated that they like our ideas and they want to take us to the next level. And we're starting to see the improvement and the change. And it's going to come, and it doesn't make a difference. I'm not going to stop and dish the dirt with the unions. They're not the ultimate judge of what needs to be done. Would I like them to agree with us and help us out? Sure, I would. But I think it's pretty clear that we have to do the right thing, and that we're prepared to do that.
One of the things your predecessor did on a couple of occasions was to say that part of the long-range cause of the question of profiling was the war on drugs as a strategy, and was willing to talk about that as a policy and was critical of it in some ways. Do you have similar criticisms, and are you willing to talk about the war on drugs as a policy and one that impacts on a state with roads like the Turnpike and the Parkway?
Well, I think what he was talking about is that, you know, with the drug interdiction, you created the aura or the reality of profiling. The problem with it was there was no defined objective. Other than merely measuring how many drug arrests and what the weight was of your narcotics, we didn't have it go toward a particular value or purpose. Cops are out there and troopers are out there to fight crime. So what's the measure? The measure is less crime. Or if they're out there on the highways to protect lives, the measure is, are there less accidents, less people being killed by accidents, less speeders, less drunken drivers? We're going to define their activities in those lights, not just say it's drug interdiction and we're going to measure you by how many pounds. That's the kind of situation that creates the area where people start cutting corners because it's about them, not about a public value.
What about your predecessor, Carson Dunbar? We asked Reverend Jackson this week how he would have graded Colonel Dunbar's performance. He said he'd give him a C for sincerity and effort. How would you rate him?
Well, I'm not in a position to rate Carson Dunbar. He was in a very tough position, I think, and I'm sure he did the very best that he could.
You say you can do better.
You know, everyone believes they can. And again, what's going to depend on is I have the support of a governor who's shown his support during the confirmation process. I have a clear mission as far as creating substantive change in the state police. I know how to do it. I've done it before.
So my question is going to be, will you come back in a year from now and give us your grade for a guy named Santiago?
I'm sure you'll be able to give me my grade.
Okay, well, we'll be happy to talk about it. That's it for this special edition of Due Process. Our guest has been State Police Superintendent Joe Santiago. We thank him for being here. We thank you for watching. And we hope you'll come back next week for more cutting-edge talk about law and social justice. Till then, for Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown for Due Process.
Joseph J. Santiago do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
and to the governments established
and to the governments established
in the United States
and
in this state
under
the authority of the people,
and under the authority of the people,
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all of the duties of the office of Superintendent of the State Police.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,